Touch her, and you answer to me." The command echoed through the royal chamber with such authority that every servant, healer, and guard froze where they stood. Morning sunlight poured through the towering windows of Blackthorne Castle, illuminating a scene no one could believe. Alpha King Lucas Blackwood had finally awakened after 3 exhausting days of fever and confusion. Yet that was not what shocked the room. What stunned everyone into silence was the young Omega maid sleeping peacefully against his chest. Her golden hair spilled across the dark blanket. One of her small hands rested near his shoulder. She looked completely unaware of the dozens of eyes staring at her. Lucas sat against the headboard, awake and alert for the first time in days. His silver eyes swept across the room until they landed on a nervous healer who had taken a step forward. The man immediately stopped moving. No one dared challenge the king. Elder Nathaniel stood near the foot of the bed, studying the situation carefully. He had served 3 generations of rulers and believed very little could surprise him anymore. Yet even he struggled to understand what he was seeing. For 72 hours, the castle's best healers had worked without rest. Nothing had eased the king's condition. Nothing had brought him comfort. Yet now Lucas appeared calm, focused, and completely recovered. And somehow the sleeping Omega maid remained at the center of it all. A servant quietly whispered, "Who is she?" Another answered, "Just one of the maids from the West Wing." The word spread through the room like wildfire. Just a maid. An Omega maid. Not a noblewoman. Not a healer. Not someone important. Yet there she was, sleeping closer to the Alpha King than anyone else in the kingdom ever could. Lucas heard the whispers. His expression hardened instantly. The room fell silent again. No one wanted to test his patience. Outside the chamber, rumors were already racing through the castle halls. Guards exchanged stories. Servants gathered in corners. Members of the royal court demanded answers. How had an unnoticed Omega maid ended up in the king's private chamber? Why was she sleeping there? Most importantly, why was the Alpha King protecting her so fiercely? Nathaniel stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty," he said, "perhaps we should move her somewhere more comfortable." Lucas immediately shook his head. "No." The answer came without hesitation. The old elder raised an eyebrow. Lucas glanced down at the sleeping girl. For a brief moment, something softened in his expression. Not weakness. Not uncertainty. Recognition. As though seeing her there felt completely natural. Nathaniel noticed the change at once. The king was not simply protecting the girl. Something else was happening. Something far deeper than anyone understood. The maid stirred slightly but did not wake. Lucas adjusted the blanket to keep her comfortable before returning his attention to the room. The simple gesture shocked everyone even more than his warning. Because kindness from a king could be given to anyone. This felt different. Personal. Meaningful. Dangerous. Across the castle, speculation continued growing. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew what had happened during the long night before. And none of them understood why the Alpha King refused to let anyone wake the Omega maid sleeping against his chest. The answer had begun the moment everyone else walked away. 24 hours earlier, long before the entire castle began whispering about the mysterious Omega maid, Emma Carter moved quietly through the western wing of Blackthorne Castle carrying a basket of fresh linens. Most people never noticed her. That was not unusual. At 20 years old, Emma had spent most of her life blending into the background. Servants hurried past her without making eye contact. Noble guests rarely remembered her name. Even among the castle staff, she was known less as a person and more as someone who completed difficult tasks without complaint. Yet despite the loneliness that sometimes accompanied such a life, Emma remained kind. Every morning she greeted the kitchen workers with a smile. She helped elderly servants carry heavy supplies. She often stayed late to finish work that others avoided. No one rewarded her for it. She simply believed kindness mattered. The castle itself was unusually tense that week. Rumors about the Alpha King's condition had spread everywhere. Servants whispered while polishing silver trays. Guards exchanged worried looks in hallways. Every conversation seemed to return to the same subject. King Lucas Blackwood had become increasingly ill, and none of the royal healers could explain why. Emma overheard fragments of these discussions throughout the day. Some claimed the king had not slept properly in days. Others insisted ancient curses were involved. Most simply admitted they were frightened. Blackthorne Castle depended on Lucas. The entire kingdom did. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered beyond the castle walls. Rain began tapping against stained glass windows. Emma finished her duties in the dining hall and prepared to return to the servants' quarters when she noticed an elderly maid struggling with a stack of folded blankets. The woman looked exhausted. "Let me help," Emma offered. The older servant smiled gratefully. Together they carried the blankets through several corridors before reaching a quiet service passage near the royal wing. There, Emma noticed something unusual. Several healers emerged from the king's chamber looking discouraged. Their faces carried the same defeated expression she had seen all week. One of them shook his head. "Nothing is working," he muttered before disappearing down the hallway. The elderly maid sighed sadly. The poor king. Emma glanced toward the large doors leading into the royal chamber. For reasons she could not explain, concern stirred inside her heart. She had never spoken to Lucas. She had only seen him from a distance during ceremonies. Yet hearing how much he was struggling bothered her. The older maid eventually left, but Emma remained standing there for a moment longer. The corridor had become strangely quiet. Rain continued falling outside. Somewhere deep inside the castle, thunder echoed through stone walls. Then one of the exhausted healers suddenly reappeared. He looked around desperately. "We need more blankets," he said. "And fresh water." Without hesitation, Emma stepped forward. "I can bring them." The healer barely looked at her before nodding. "Good." Quickly. Minutes later, carrying supplies in both arms, Emma crossed the threshold into the royal chamber for the first time in her life. She had no idea that a simple act of helping would place her on a path that would change not only her future, but the future of the entire kingdom as well. The royal chamber felt heavier the moment Emma entered carrying fresh blankets and a pitcher of water. Candlelight flickered across stone walls while rain rattled against the tall windows overlooking the dark kingdom beyond. Several healers moved quietly around the room, their faces marked by exhaustion. Some had not slept properly in days. Others were preparing to leave after another unsuccessful attempt to help the king. Emma lowered the supplies onto a nearby table and immediately sensed the hopelessness hanging in the air. At the center of the room, Lucas Blackwood rested against a mountain of pillows. Even in his weakened state, he carried the presence of a ruler born to command. Yet tonight that strength seemed distant. His silver eyes remained closed. His breathing was uneven. Every healer who approached him eventually stepped away with the same defeated expression. Emma watched silently while fresh linens were arranged and new remedies prepared. Hours passed. One by one, the castle's experts exhausted every idea they had. Midnight arrived. Thunder rolled across the sky outside. The storm only grew stronger. Eventually, a senior healer rubbed his eyes and shook his head. "There is nothing more we can do tonight." No one argued. The room had reached the point where even hope felt tired. Several attendants quietly gathered their supplies. Others slipped from the chamber without speaking. Elder Nathaniel remained near the fireplace, studying Lucas with concern. Before leaving, one healer noticed Emma still standing nearby. "You can go as well," he said. "Someone else will take over." Emma glanced toward the king. For reasons she could not explain, leaving felt wrong. "I can stay a little longer," she offered softly. The healer barely reacted. To him, she was simply another maid. "If you wish." The room gradually emptied until only Nathaniel, two guards outside the door, and Emma remained. The old elder eventually stepped into an adjoining study to review records and correspondence. For the first time all night, silence settled over the chamber. Emma moved carefully through the room, replacing cooled cloths with fresh ones and straightening blankets that had shifted. Simple tasks. Ordinary tasks. Yet somehow the atmosphere felt calmer. Lucas stirred slightly. Emma froze, worried she might have disturbed him. Instead, his breathing slowly became steadier. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The storm continued raging beyond the windows. Emma remained nearby, quietly tending the room whenever needed. She spoke no grand words. She performed no miraculous act. She simply stayed when everyone else had grown too exhausted to continue. Sometime after 2 in the morning, Lucas opened his eyes briefly. His gaze landed on Emma. She immediately lowered her head respectfully. "Your Majesty," she whispered. For a moment neither spoke. Then Lucas closed his eyes once more. Yet something had changed. The tension that had gripped the room for days seemed to ease ever so slightly. Emma noticed it. Nathaniel noticed it when he returned. Neither understood why. The old elder studied the sleeping king with growing curiosity. Because after days of struggle, Lucas appeared more peaceful than he had in nearly a week. And the only thing that had changed was the presence of an unnoticed Omega maid who had chosen to stay when everyone else walked away. Rain continued falling against the castle windows as the night stretched toward dawn. Inside the royal chamber, only a few candles remained lit. Their warm glow cast long shadows across the stone walls while silence settled over the room. Emma sat in a chair near the king's bed, fighting exhaustion. She had been awake for nearly 20 hours. Yet each time she considered leaving, something encouraged her to stay a little longer. Perhaps it was concern. Perhaps it was simple kindness. Whatever the reason, she remained. Across the room, Elder Nathaniel quietly reviewed old medical records while occasionally glancing toward Lucas. The difference was becoming impossible to ignore. Earlier that evening, the king had seemed trapped inside constant discomfort. Now his breathing was steady. The tension in his expression had softened. Most remarkably, he was finally sleeping peacefully. Nathaniel frowned thoughtfully. None of the medicines explained the improvement. None of the treatments accounted for such a dramatic change. His eyes eventually shifted toward Emma. She sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap, unaware she was being observed. The old elder had spent decades studying unusual events. Experience taught him that when something impossible happened, the smallest details often mattered most. Another hour passed. The storm outside slowly weakened. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, the first signs of dawn approached. Emma rose from her chair to replace a candle that had nearly burned out. As she moved across the room, Lucas stirred slightly. Nathaniel immediately noticed. The king's expression tightened. His breathing became less steady. Emma froze. Concern crossed her face. Then she stepped back toward her chair. Almost instantly, Lucas relaxed again. Nathaniel's eyes widened. Surely it was coincidence. Yet several minutes later, the same thing happened. Emma left the bedside to fetch fresh water. Lucas became restless. The moment she returned, calmness followed. This time Nathaniel watched every detail carefully. By the third occurrence, coincidence was no longer a convincing explanation. Something connected the king's condition to the young Omega maid. The realization seemed absurd. Emma possessed no special title, no known healing abilities, no remarkable status within the castle. Yet the evidence stood directly before him. As dawn finally arrived, exhaustion overcame Emma. She had intended to rest only for a moment. Sitting beside the bed, she leaned forward slightly while trying to remain awake. Within minutes, sleep claimed her. Nathaniel looked up from his records and smiled faintly. The poor girl had pushed herself beyond her limits. He considered waking her and sending her back to the servants' quarters. Before he could move, Lucas shifted unexpectedly. Still asleep, the king reached toward the nearest source of comfort without conscious thought. The blanket moved slightly. Emma gently leaned against him. Neither seemed aware of what had happened. Yet almost immediately, a profound sense of calm settled over the room. Nathaniel stared in disbelief. The tension that had haunted the chamber for days vanished completely. Even the atmosphere itself felt lighter. The old elder slowly lowered himself into a nearby chair. Questions filled his mind. Who was Emma Carter? Why did her presence affect the king so strongly? And most importantly, what would happen when the rest of Blackthorne Castle discovered that the only person capable of bringing peace to the Alpha King was an Omega maid nobody had ever noticed before? By mid-morning, the entire castle seemed to be holding its breath. News traveled faster than any messenger could run. Servants whispered in kitchens. Guards exchanged rumors in hallways. Members of the royal court abandoned important meetings just to discuss the unbelievable scene witnessed inside the king's chamber. An Omega maid had spent the night beside Alpha King Lucas Blackwood. Worse, according to several frightened attendants, the king had personally forbidden anyone from disturbing her. The story grew more dramatic each time it was repeated. Some claimed Lucas had ordered the entire royal guard to protect her. Others insisted ancient magic was involved. Very few knew the truth. Inside the chamber itself, Emma finally began to wake. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, replacing the storm-dark atmosphere of the previous night. For several confused seconds, she remained completely unaware of where she was. Then reality returned all at once. Her eyes widened. She immediately sat upright and realized she was far closer to the king than any servant should ever be. Panic flooded her face. "Your Majesty," she whispered, scrambling to stand. Before she could retreat, Lucas calmly raised a hand. "You do not need to apologize." Emma froze. The king's voice carried none of the irritation she expected. In fact, he seemed remarkably relaxed. Elder Nathaniel observed the exchange carefully from across the room. Once again he noticed the same pattern. Lucas appeared stronger, more alert, more at peace. And every improvement coincided with Emma's presence. The old elder's curiosity deepened. Meanwhile, beyond the chamber doors, several nobles demanded answers. Lady Victoria Ashford, daughter of one of the kingdom's most influential families, was particularly displeased. She had spent years expecting to secure a place beside the throne through political alliances and social influence. The idea that an unknown Omega maid had suddenly become important to the king was unacceptable. Victoria arrived outside the chamber accompanied by several members of the royal court. Her expression remained perfectly composed, but frustration simmered beneath the surface. "Surely there has been some misunderstanding," she said. "A servant cannot possibly be the center of this situation." Nathaniel stepped into the corridor before anyone else could respond. The experienced elder recognized danger when he saw it. Sometimes the greatest threats arrived wearing polite smiles. Back inside the room, Emma attempted to leave several times. Each time, Lucas calmly continued the conversation. He asked her simple questions. How long had she worked at the castle? Did she enjoy her duties? Had she slept at all during the previous night? Emma answered nervously, still struggling to understand why the king seemed interested in anything she had to say. To her, she was simply a maid. Nothing more. Yet Lucas listened to every answer as though it mattered. Hours later, when Emma finally left to return to her duties, something unexpected happened. The moment she disappeared beyond the doorway, a familiar tension returned to the room. It was subtle, yet Nathaniel noticed immediately. So did Lucas. The old elder slowly turned toward the king. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Nathaniel asked the question that had been forming in his mind all morning. "Your Majesty, what if Emma Carter is not as ordinary as everyone believes?" Lucas looked toward the closed door through which she had just departed. For reasons he could not explain, he already suspected the answer might change everything. That afternoon, while rumors continued spreading through every corner of Blackthorne Castle, Elder Nathaniel disappeared into a section of the royal archives that few people even knew existed. Hidden behind rows of ancient records and forgotten histories stood a sealed chamber reserved for documents considered too important to remain in public circulation. Dust covered most of the shelves. Some records had not been touched in decades. Yet Nathaniel knew exactly what he was searching for. During his long life, he had learned to trust patterns. Emma's presence calming the Alpha King was not a coincidence. Something deeper connected them. The answer had to exist somewhere. Hour after hour, he examined old family registries, servant records, and noble genealogies. Most revealed nothing unusual. Emma Carter appeared to be exactly what everyone believed her to be. An Omega maid from an unremarkable background. Yet the more Nathaniel searched, the more inconsistencies he discovered. Certain dates did not match. Several records appeared altered. Entire sections of family history had been deliberately removed. Someone had worked very hard to hide the truth. Meanwhile, Emma attempted to return to normal life. She folded linens, delivered supplies, assisted kitchen workers. Yet normal had become impossible. Everywhere she went, people stared. Servants whispered when she passed. Some appeared curious. Others looked jealous. A few seemed frightened. Emma lowered her eyes and focused on her duties, wishing the attention would disappear. She still could not understand why the king had treated her so differently. Across the castle, Lady Victoria Ashford watched everything with growing frustration. The more she learned about Emma, the less sense the situation made. There was nothing impressive about the young maid. No noble title. No wealth. No influence. Yet somehow she had become the most discussed person in the castle overnight. Victoria refused to accept it. Back inside the archives, Nathaniel finally discovered something hidden within a sealed collection of records dating back more than 20 years. Tucked between unrelated documents rested a thin file bearing a symbol he recognized immediately. It belonged to one of the oldest bloodlines in kingdom history, a family so rare that most scholars believed it had disappeared generations ago. Nathaniel carefully opened the file. His heartbeat quickened as he read the contents. The first page listed a child whose identity had been concealed shortly after birth. The second page contained signatures from powerful officials who had sworn to keep the secret forever. The third page contained a name: Emma Carter. Nathaniel stared at the document in disbelief. According to the hidden records, Emma had never been an ordinary servant. She was a direct descendant of an ancient lineage connected to some of the oldest legends in the kingdom. A bloodline associated with balance, healing, and royal destiny. The old elder slowly lowered himself into a chair. Suddenly everything began making sense. The king's reaction. Emma's presence. The impossible calm that followed whenever she remained nearby. None of it was random. As evening approached, Nathaniel carried the file toward the royal wing. Lucas needed to see this immediately. Yet even the elder did not realize the discovery represented only part of the truth, because hidden beneath the final page of the file was a folded document sealed with wax. A document that contained a forgotten prophecy waiting to change both of their lives forever. The sealed document remained unopened until Nathaniel reached the king's private study later that evening. Outside, the castle buzzed with endless speculation, but inside the study only silence existed. Lucas sat beside a tall window overlooking the courtyard while the elder carefully placed the ancient file on the desk between them. The king immediately noticed the seriousness in Nathaniel's expression. "You found something," Lucas said. Nathaniel nodded. "Much more than I expected." For the next several minutes he explained everything. The hidden records. The altered documents. The forgotten bloodline connected to Emma Carter. Lucas listened without interruption. Nothing in the elder's explanation sounded impossible anymore. Too many strange events had already occurred. The moment Nathaniel finished, Lucas lowered his gaze toward the sealed prophecy. The wax seal carried the same ancient symbol found throughout Emma's file. "Open it," the king said. Nathaniel carefully broke the seal and unfolded the fragile parchment. The writing had faded with age, but the message remained clear. As the elder began reading, a strange stillness filled the room. The prophecy spoke of a daughter hidden among ordinary lives. A woman whose value would remain unseen until a time of great uncertainty. It described a ruler burdened by isolation who would find peace only in her presence. Most remarkably, it predicted that powerful people would attempt to separate them out of fear, pride, and ambition. When Nathaniel finished reading, neither man spoke immediately. The words felt less like a prediction and more like a description of events already unfolding. Across the castle, Emma remained completely unaware of the discovery. She spent the evening organizing storage rooms and helping prepare supplies for the next day. The work allowed her to escape the attention that followed her everywhere. Yet even in the quieter sections of the castle, whispers continued. Servants stopped talking whenever she approached. Some smiled kindly. Others seemed suspicious. Emma tried her best to ignore all of it. She simply wanted life to return to normal. Unfortunately, normal was becoming impossible. Lady Victoria Ashford had spent the entire day gathering information. Every conversation seemed to end the same way. No one could explain why the king trusted Emma. No one understood why her presence affected him so strongly. Victoria disliked unanswered questions. More importantly, she disliked losing influence. By sunset, she had convinced herself that Emma represented a threat to the future she had planned for years. The following morning, Victoria arranged an opportunity to confront the young maid. The encounter appeared innocent enough. A simple request for assistance in one of the formal reception halls. Emma accepted without hesitation. Helping others was part of her job. When she arrived, however, she discovered several noblewomen already gathered there. Their smiles seemed polite, but the atmosphere felt wrong. Questions began almost immediately. Where had she come from? Why had the king shown interest in her? Did she truly expect anyone to believe she belonged near the throne? Emma answered respectfully, refusing to respond with anger. Yet every answer only seemed to frustrate them further. Unknown to everyone in the room, Lucas had just received the final translated portion of the prophecy, and hidden within its final lines was a warning. It revealed that the greatest obstacle standing between destiny and fulfillment would not come from enemies outside the kingdom. It would come from people already inside the castle walls. The tension inside Blackthorne Castle grew heavier with each passing day. What had begun as whispers had become open discussion among nobles, advisors, and servants alike. Everywhere people gathered, Emma Carter's name eventually entered the conversation. Some spoke with curiosity, others spoke with admiration, many spoke with concern. Yet none of them knew the truth that Lucas and Nathaniel had recently uncovered. Hidden inside the final section of the prophecy was a revelation that changed everything. Late that evening, the king and the elder sat alone in the royal library surrounded by ancient texts and flickering candlelight. Nathaniel carefully reread the translated passage. According to the prophecy, the hidden daughter would not simply bring comfort to a ruler. She would help restore balance during a period of division within the kingdom. Her influence would unite people who had grown separated by pride, status, and fear. More importantly, the prophecy warned that those who judged her by her position would fail to recognize her true worth until it was almost too late. Lucas listened silently. The more he learned about Emma, the less he cared about titles or bloodlines. Every report he received described the same person: kind, humble, compassionate. The qualities that mattered most had always belonged to her long before anyone discovered ancient records. Meanwhile, Emma spent the evening alone in a quiet courtyard garden. The castle had become overwhelming. Too many eyes followed her. Too many questions surrounded her. She sat beside a stone fountain while moonlight reflected across the water. For the first time since everything changed, doubt crept into her thoughts. She had never wanted attention. She had never wanted influence. She only wanted to do her job and help where she could. Yet somehow her life had become connected to forces far beyond her understanding. Footsteps approached along the garden path. Emma looked up and was surprised to find Lucas standing there. No guards, no advisors, just the king himself. He joined her beside the fountain without ceremony. For a few moments neither spoke. The peaceful silence felt strangely natural. Finally Emma looked toward him. "Everyone keeps treating me differently," she admitted softly. Lucas studied the moonlit water before answering. "That says more about them than it does about you." Emma frowned slightly. Lucas turned toward her. "You were kind when no one was watching. You stayed when everyone else left. Nothing that has happened since then changes who you are." The words settled gently into her heart. For the first time in days, some of her uncertainty began to fade. Unseen by both of them, Nathaniel watched from a distant balcony. The old elder smiled quietly. The prophecy spoke of destiny, but it also spoke of choice. Lucas was not drawn toward Emma because of ancient words written on parchment. He was drawn toward the person she had always been. At that same moment, a messenger rushed through the castle carrying urgent news. Several powerful noble families had requested an emergency gathering at court the following morning. They intended to challenge everything that was happening. And for the first time, Lucas realized the moment described by the prophecy had finally arrived. The following morning, the grand court of Blackthorne Castle filled earlier than anyone could remember. Nobles arrived in formal attire. Advisors gathered in quiet groups. Representatives from influential families occupied every available seat. Word had spread that an important matter would be addressed before the throne. At the center of the growing tension stood a single question. What place, if any, did Emma Carter have in the future of the kingdom? Emma herself had not wanted to attend, yet Nathaniel had personally asked her to be present. Now she stood near the back of the great hall, dressed in the same modest uniform she had always worn. Surrounded by wealth and status, she felt smaller than ever. Across the room, Lady Victoria Ashford sat confidently among the nobles who supported her position. Many believed the gathering would finally restore order. Others expected Emma to quietly disappear from the center of attention. Then the great doors opened. Silence swept across the hall. Alpha King Lucas Blackwood entered and walked toward the throne. Every eye followed him. The king took his place before the assembly and allowed the silence to settle. One noble eventually stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he began respectfully, "the kingdom deserves clarity regarding recent events." Several others nodded in agreement. Another noble rose. "Many are concerned that an ordinary servant has suddenly become connected to matters of great importance." Emma lowered her gaze. The familiar feeling of being judged returned. For a moment she wished she could leave the room entirely. Then Lucas stood. The movement alone commanded complete attention. He stepped away from the throne and slowly descended the platform. The nobles watched in confusion as he crossed the hall. He did not walk toward Victoria. He did not walk toward the council. He walked directly toward Emma. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. Emma looked up in surprise as Lucas stopped beside her. The entire court stared in disbelief. Nathaniel remained silent, knowing the moment described in the prophecy had finally arrived. Lucas turned toward the assembly. "For weeks," he said calmly, "many of you have asked the wrong question." No one spoke. "You ask why Emma matters." His silver eyes swept across the room. "You should be asking why so many people failed to see her value." Uneasy silence followed. Lucas continued. "When this castle faced uncertainty, she stayed. When others gave up, she remained. She asked for nothing. She expected nothing. Her kindness existed long before anyone discovered ancient records or forgotten bloodlines." Several nobles lowered their eyes. The truth was difficult to deny. Lucas then did something no one expected. He remained standing beside Emma instead of returning to the throne. The gesture carried more meaning than any speech. He was making a choice for the entire kingdom to see. Emma felt emotion rise within her chest. For the first time in her life, someone powerful had not looked past her. They had seen her. Truly seen her. Nathaniel smiled quietly as sunlight poured through the great windows behind them. The prophecy had never been about crowns or titles. It had been about recognition, about seeing worth where others saw none. Around the hall, resistance slowly faded. Some people still doubted. Others still questioned. Yet the moment had already changed everything. Standing side by side before the kingdom, Lucas and Emma represented something stronger than status. Hope. And as the morning light filled the court, a future once hidden from both of them finally began.